Hello, everyone. Hit the like button and subscribe for more content just like this. Today, we are going into my election forecast for the 2024 presidential election. So, looking at my last video's model, we clearly see that Donald Trump's average performance is around 285 electoral college votes to Harris's 253 electoral college votes, having about a 65% chance to win the general election, with about 15 scenarios for an electoral college tie. So the chance of that happening is about 1.5%. Harris at about basically almost 1/3 of a chance at winning the presidential election. And looking at the election model here, we have a demographic margin, which we basically plug in our own margins for the demographics. We then find the nonpartisan leaning of every single state, how they vote relative to the nation, and shift that based on my average of the popular vote, which I estimate to be a Donald Trump plus 2.4 national environment. We actually need to bump that up to plus 2.6. I don't know why I hadn't bumped that up yet. That should have boosted his chances in some of the swing states very slightly. And then on top of that, we also end up having my polling average in those states end up deciding the average, and then those three margins are then calculated together to get my final margins for my election model. And then the probability / simulation model is then conducted for all of the states, and effectively Donald Trump is ahead in the electoral college as of right now. And today I'm going to be going over my election forecast and to tell you guys why Donald Trump is up in the electoral college right now. So for the safe Republican states, we have Utah, Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, the Dakotas, all of Nebraska, including Kansas, as well as Oklahoma. We put that in the safe column: Missouri, Arkansas, Louisiana, as well as Alaska, Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky, Indiana, West Virginia, as well as Iowa and Ohio, including South Carolina, as well as the state of Florida. I do think it's going to be over 15 points for Donald Trump, including Maine's 2nd congressional district. That puts Donald Trump at 179 safe electoral college votes. Looking at the current polling averages that I have for the national level, we can see that Donald Trump has been ahead, and this is not your conventional polling average. What I have done is I've essentially gotten all of the recent national polling data that goes back by a month, and what I do is I reweigh all of the party ID numbers based to a target electorate, which I do believe is going to be a tied electorate going into 2024, and that essentially reweighs all the Democrat or super Republican leaning samples back to where they should be. It just so happens to be that all of the pollsters are leaning Democrat this cycle, and when you go ahead and adjust for that, Donald Trump is actually at 48.3%, which is higher than what he got in 2020, which he got 46.9% of the popular vote, and bigger than 46.1% that he got in 2016. And so that does put him in a pretty good spot to be winning states like Iowa, Ohio, and Florida by safe margins. In Iowa, funny enough, he actually has a poll from Ann Seltzer, who's the most accurate pollster from there, who actually still underestimates Donald Trump by a point in their polls, a point or two. Donald Trump's up in a unreleased poll from Iowa by 19 points. And so that's pretty insane to see that kind of margin come out of Iowa. Looking at some of these safe Democrat states, California, DC, Maryland, Massachusetts, and Vermont will also be in this column, including the state of Hawaii. California about 23 points, Hawaii 17 points for Harris, Maryland about 29 points, Massachusetts 31, Vermont somewhat around 31 to 33, and DC around, basically 75 to 80% for Harris in terms of the margin. Looking at the likely states, we have Texas at 13 points for Donald Trump. He's more than likely going to improve in the southern border area of the state. You can see he made massive gains between 2016 and 2020, even flipped some counties in the southern border because of the border wall policies, and arguably actually saved the state for him back in that cycle. And he'll probably improve in some of the urban areas, sort of like how he stagnated them in 2020, except he'll probably actually gain in the city areas in this coming up election cycle. Looking at Georgia and North Carolina right now, these states are going to be in the likely Republican column. North Carolina is going to be around an 8 to 9 point win for Donald Trump, and Georgia is around 5 to 6 points for the former president. Same thing for the state of Arizona. Nevada around 6 to 7 points. Maricopa is probably going to flip by 4 to 5 points for Donald Trump next cycle, and he will probably gain in the outer parts of the state. Nevada, he'll come close in Clark County, and he'll make it pretty competitive there as well. Looking at Wisconsin, this will more than likely fall in the likely category, no pun intended. And what's interesting about it is I believe that he is probably going to perform very well in the driftless area. Republicans have been gaining there with Donald Trump, and they've slowly been losing ground in some of these wild counties. But I do believe he's going to get killer margins in some of these rural areas and really outrun Kamala Harris in these rural areas, as she really has no Rust Belt appeal whatsoever. And he may even probably gain in some of the wild counties despite them kind of trending to the left. So that's probably what you'll see in Wisconsin. Right now, my polling average there actually has him winning the state by a little bit over 5 points right now. He's actually up by 6.4% in the average when you factor in undecideds. And so now looking at the likely Democrat states, Washington, Oregon are going to be in this column around 10 to 13 points for Kamala Harris. Colorado at 8 to 9 points for Harris. Illinois around 10 to 11 points. Connecticut, Delaware, Rhode Island, New Jersey will probably fall under 10 points. New York around 11 to 13 points, kind of in line with what the polling has right now. And so that kind of gives you your traditional swing states, except Maine's first, which is about a 12-point win for Kamala Harris. Looking at the lean Republican states, we have Michigan and Pennsylvania in this column. Michigan probably around 1.4% for Donald Trump. Pennsylvania 2.7%. These are what my polling averages currently have in these states right now. And looking at some of these more bluer states right now, what's pretty interesting is my average in Minnesota is around 4.5 points for Kamala Harris. This is actually her best swing state, funny enough, and it's probably because she appeals to people in Hennepin County by quite a bit. Now we look at Virginia and New Mexico, and my averages there for the adjusted polling data are kind of close. I mean, they're all within half a point basically, which is pretty crazy considering that Donald Trump did lose the state by quite a bit last time, and it's based off of 4 polls, and when you average out those 4 polls, Harris is up by around 0.8% in the state of Virginia. And looking at a state like New Mexico, even if we can find the average here, right now Donald Trump is literally trailing by 0.3% in the state of New Mexico, and it's voting to the right of Virginia in this scenario. So I do think right now Kamala Harris probably may end up winning it by about a tilt margin right now. Virginia possibly does go to her by a little bit over a point, probably 1.5 right now if I kind of had to guess, just because of those suburbanite voters in Nova. Nebraska second is a close one, but I do think it does go to Donald Trump very narrowly. And New Hampshire, I think, will probably narrowly go for the former president. Maine being pretty competitive. Harris probably wins by 1.5. My average has her up by 2. In New Hampshire, my average has Donald Trump up by around 2.5 points, but I'm actually saying he's probably going to end up winning it very narrowly. Maine and New Hampshire are interesting states because they have way more independents than a lot of the swing states, believe it or not. And so if Donald Trump does improve with independents, like Rasmussen reports is saying, or a lot of the polling data even is suggesting him having a 10 to 20 point shift with independents, he's probably going to end up gaining in some of those areas by quite a bit, to the point where states like Maine and New Hampshire could probably even be voting to the right of Minnesota or even New Mexico possibly. Now, if you guys did enjoy this election analysis, make sure to hit the like button and to subscribe if you want more content just like this, and I will see you guys in the next video.